Greetings and welcome back to Normal Guy Games. Make sure you like and subscribe, and if you feel like it, please share the channel as well. I could use it. So this time, I have actually a box of Daughters of Khaine, a bunch of stuff. It's about 1,600 points worth of models, I believe, and part of that is an Ironscale Melusai. So what I'm doing here is primarily just testing my paint scheme and trying to figure out how I want to work everything out as far as like hair colors, you know, the color for their for all of their clothing and whatnot. So let's get into it and let me show you what I've come up with so far. So this video is going to be a little bit longer than my other ones. As you can see here, this is where I started. The tail, I did airbrush that, and I left the hair off because it would make it easier to paint everything else. So as you can see here, I'm doing the regular slap chop thing, and I'm pushing the highlights on the hair with a little bit of white. Now, here's the thing with this. I did have a little bit of an airbrush mishap, and it splattered all over the place. So unfortunately, she got part of that splatter. So, I mean, it's nothing I can't work with. So I actually did not even stop there as I was doing everything. I actually went back, and you'll see here in just a minute, I did some extra highlights on like the raised areas with that same white paint. Now for this scheme, I am going for very bright, kind of vibrant colors, and what I did here is I did a kind of a wet blend of Aethermatic Blue and Eldari Emerald, and then at the tips I also put some Volupus Pink, but I ended up not liking that, and I hit it all again with Eldari Emerald because I just, you know, it just ended up looking kind of strange and grainy towards the end there, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the way it looked. So the tail, of course, was airbrushed. That was just me testing the purples. But the thing is, you don't have to airbrush that. That actually can be done with just a regular brush like I'm doing here, like just slap chopping. This is just me dry brushing a little bit of white over top of those raised areas. Now, the thing here is when you're doing this, make sure you hit those top areas. And I actually went back, and this is something you should do if you want to make everything kind of coherent. I took some of that white paint and I made sure to hit some of the more raised areas, like the shoulders, the back, the arms, the tops of the hands and the fingers, the knuckles, the staff. You know, all of the bits that I was going to use Eldari Emerald on to make them look jade. I actually took the tops of those, like the snakes here on her headdress, and I hit all of those corners and all of those top areas with that same white paint. Now, what this does is this is what I mean by pushing the highlights, right? So what I'm doing by throwing that extra white on there is making sure that when I throw that contrast paint or the thin down paint, whatever you're using, is speed paint, you know, the express color, whichever, what that does is it ensures that you will have on those top areas a very bright, very vibrant color, a lot more vibrant than the colors that will be in the lower areas. The trick here is to just find out what edges the light would be reflecting off of. Now, as you can see, for instance, on the staff, on the blade part, and on the snakes, I hit only those raised areas. I'm not hitting every surface. I'm not hitting every corner. I'm not doing an edge highlight here. I'm just doing a highlight to pull out that white. Now, the scheme that I've chosen here is pretty much, this is all a test for me. A test to see if I like the way it's going to turn out. and to see if I want to paint the rest of the army like this. Now, as I said, with the like with the tail and whatnot, you do not have to airbrush that. That can all be done by slap chopping. But I did, as you can tell, I slap chopped her upper torso, and on all of the Melusai, all of the snakes, I decided to go ahead and put them just to airbrush their tails, just to see how it would look. Now, I'm using Guilliman flesh here, and I ended up actually not liking the look of it. It ended up being a little bit too dark for me, so I did go back later and do some highlights and some changes on the color scheme, which is actually, it's one of the things that I encourage, right? So if you don't like, especially if you don't like something, you can go back and you can go right over top of it and paint a lighter color to simulate a highlight. So like with her hair here, for instance, this is all just Eldari Emerald again. Nothing has changed. For all of the belts and the straps and all of that, I did go in initially with Gargax Sewer because I kind of wanted it to be a little bit dark. Now, I did end up afterward hitting these with a Mournfang brown because they just were a little too dark, right? So the rest of the scheme is really bright and vibrant, and I felt like the straps and the leather they were all just a little too dark. And this is just me trying to have a little bit of cohesion in my scheme. Now, depending on which contrast paint you use is, that depends on what everything will look like. And once again, I mean, you can throw a little bit more paint on there. You can throw another color on top and kind of brighten things up a little bit. Now, as you can see here, this is Eldari Emerald, and different from the hair, you can tell here that I did some white highlights. If you look really closely on the edges of the snakes here, of the headdress, you can tell where I did the extra white highlight. It really does show through it, and in some places it's a little more subtle than others, but regardless, you can see where those highlights are. And that's the effect you're going for with slap chop, is you want those extra raised areas, the raised areas and the sticky out bits to be brighter than the rest of the scheme, than the shadows and the depths and the recesses. Now for the metal, I ended up, since I used my last pot of lead belcher, I ended up using gunmetal by Army Painter. It was okay. I'm not sure still how I feel about the Army Painter paints. I've had a really hard time getting them to thin properly, getting them to not be as grainy, and that's with a ton of shaking, So, but the metallic paint, the gunmetal, turned out pretty good, honestly. I will give them that. Their metallics are pretty good. I sort of have begun to prefer the Vallejo metals, though, so I probably will switch back to the Vallejo stuff. Now for her staff, I did use another contrast paint, and that is going to be Black Templar. I did not thin it down, because what I wanted here is I wanted that midsection to be a darker color than the rest. I don't want the mid point of the staff to be a point of focus. What I want is for her face to be bright and shiny and right in focus, and I want her I want the head of the staff also to be kind of a point of focus as well. I want that to be bright and vibrant. Now, once again, the staff here, this is just Eldari Emerald. There's nothing here that is new or different. It's the same thing I used for her headdress and the same thing I used for the hair. But once again, you can tell where I put in those highlights. You can tell where the white is popping through on the Eldari Emerald. Now this Eldari Emerald, if it goes over a bright enough color, it actually does look kind of jade, sort of a darker jade color. But that's only if you push those highlights and get all of those areas prepared to show the white through. Now the column here that she's wrapped around, I did not want that to be a point of interest. So what I did is I left the purple dry brushing where it was, and I took some thinned down dawnstone and I painted that over all of the column. Now that does still allow some of that purple to show through, and actually I'm quite fine with that, because it's all that is just a variation in color. For her tabard here, I used Incubi Darkness, and for the highlight colors, I used Dark Reaper, and I also used a ice. It's not an ice blue. It's actually a Calgar blue by Citadel, and the Calgar blue I just used on the more raised areas. The Incubi Darkness, I really like this color, and you'll have to excuse me. Trying to get behind the tabard is not so easy, so I had to turn the model around to get to it properly. But anyway, so with the Dark Reaper and the Incubi Darkness, as you can see here, the Incubi Darkness puts everything at a very very dark blue, almost a black blue when you really look at it. And then I took that Dark Reaper and I kind of mixed everything together, and I left a little bit Incubi, a little bit Dark Reaper on one side, and in that center I let the two colors mix. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling from that center part first, and I'm using the two colors mixed to build up a gradient highlight on the raised areas of the cloth. Now I will work my way all the way through to just the Dark Reaper, and just the Dark Reaper I put that on the very very tops of the cloth. And then I come back with that Calgar blue mixed in with a little bit of Dark Reaper, and I put that on the very highest raised edges. And what that does is it shows just a little bit of transition between the higher areas and the lower areas, and it makes everything kind of pop a little bit. Now I did do several layers of this. As you can see, I started out with just a little bit of Dark Reaper, and then a little more, and a little more, and a little more, until, as you can see here, I'm using just pure Dark Reaper on just a few set areas. Now I did also kind of put a little bit of cross hatching here and there. Not exactly cross hatching, but I used thin strokes to try and put a little bit of texture on that cloth as well. Now for the hearts that are attached to her belt, I wanted there to be a very contrasting color to the rest of the scheme, so I decided to just go with red. And this is the age-old buildup of the corn red, and then Mephiston red, and then I used Evil Sun Scarlet, and the very last highlight I actually used oh goodness, it was Wild Rider red. That's what it is, Wild Rider red. So the Wild Rider red I used very sparingly on just a few of the upper raised areas. And with that, the Wild Rider red is really, really close to orange, so you have to be very careful. Now here, this is just a very rough sketch of what I want her scales, or the underbelly, to look like. Now I am doing just the very center of the underbelly scales, the plates or whatever they're called here. And I am using a couple of scale 75 paints. Once again, I'm trying to test them to see how well they thin, how well they work. Honestly, the pale pink it doesn't really thin very well, and I don't know if I'm going to continue using it. There is an indigo color that I have really been enjoying, and that color is Cobalt Violet Gray. That is of the set, that's one of my favorites. But this pastel pink doesn't seem to be going very well. Now, this color, I took a non-thinned down Shaiish purple, and I just painted that up on the upper parts of her snake body, and this is just that top ridge is all. There's nothing, nothing here, nothing anywhere else but the top ridge, and that was to add a little bit of variation to the colors on her tail. The gold here is Retributor armor, because that is right now kind of my favorite gold. It's what I use for my Stormcast Eternals. It's kind of my go-to for gold right now. I have been meaning to try out some of the Monument Hobbies colors, but for right now I've got 2 pots of Retributor armor that I'm trying to work my way through, and I do really like the way Retributor armor looks. It's very shiny. Now, I do have a secret formula that I use to make kind of a burnished gold out of this, and I will show you that here in just a minute. But for just these pieces here, these parts here, this is just plain old Retributor armor. I didn't thin it down much, and I did not add anything to it. As you can see with the beads, I'm also using Retributor armor on the beads, or these golden strands or tassels, whatever they are, because I wanted there to be a couple more shiny places. Now, I had originally thought to color them as pearls or whatnot, maybe even black pearls, but I ended up liking the idea of these golden strands, like golden necklace, kind of an excess or decadence kind of deal for her. And I think it turned out pretty well. I will admit, painting these each of these individual strands was a little bit tedious, because of the fact that you have to paint one side, paint the other side, and while you're doing it, you have to make sure that the two, like the upper and lower parts of it, are done. Now, as you can see here, I also painted the gemstones, both in her armor plate, like her breastplate, and in the staff. I painted both of those in the same Retributor armor, and I painted all of it in Retributor armor, because it would be difficult, of course, to paint the lower pieces and not get paint everywhere. And this is one of the reasons why one of the methods you want to use, you always want to paint the lower areas first. That way, when you go up to the higher areas, you'll be just fine. Now, for these gems, I decided to use the same color as the heart, and I went with the same color scheme. So this is, again, Corn Red, Mephiston Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, and just a touch of Wild Rider. And all that does, again, is just build up a kind of gradient on the reds, and those upper raised areas will look like they've got a little more light shining down on them. And once again, the Wild Rider Red, I'm just using just a touch of it in just a few small places, because it is a very powerful color. It's a very vibrant color, so you only want it to be on a very small area when you're doing gemstones and things like that. Now, for the pillar, what I'm doing here is I'm using just Nuln Oil, and I'm darkening that down, and that's for me, I don't want the pillar to be a big point of focus, so I'm not going to do a whole lot to it. I'm not going to make it look excessively detailed. I really want it to be the last thing that someone looks at. Now, Reichland Flesh Shade Gloss is my go-to for making a burnished gold armor, and it looks like kind of a reddish gold, almost an older saturated gold, something that has seen some action. At least to me, that's what it looks like. And that gloss actually makes things shine a little bit. And if you were so inclined, you could also put a little bit of this on the gems, like I'm doing here, and it will actually make the gems shine just a little bit. Now, an alternative is actually you can use clear nail polish, the glossy clear nail polish, and you can do the same thing with the gemstones. I would not recommend doing it on armor unless you want the armor really, really shiny. But on the gemstones, it's easy enough. You could put a dab of that gloss clear nail varnish on there and put it and make it shiny. What I'm doing here is I am using a Vallejo dark tone wash for the first time. I don't think I've used it before. All right, this is the important part. This is the important part. As you can see, what I've got here is a very light flesh tone, and this is the Cadian flesh tone or Kislev flesh, one of the two. And I'm just doing those upper raised areas, and I'm trying to clean up some of those tide marks left behind by the Guilliman flesh. Now, big point here. I decided to actually push the highlights a little bit more, and I took a Phantom Glow paint, which is a Reaper paint, and I went over top of some of those white highlights with just a touch of this Phantom Glow, and that makes these pieces look a lot more jade than they were. So her hair actually kind of stands out as being darker. So what I did is I did not only this, but I also did a couple of strands of her hair too, to kind of make the hair match the jade of the weapons. So far, I gotta say, I really like this scheme. I had originally, I was going to go really different with it, and I was going to paint her kind of dark and desaturated and really grim. But I am really glad that I did this, because it's been a while since I've painted a model in a very bright, kind of vibrant color scheme with a lot of different colors and a lot of highlights. And I got to tell you, I do not regret doing this, not one bit. I really like the way that this turns out in the end. Now, what you're seeing here is me once again pulling out that Dawnstone, and I'm just going over a couple of the raised areas here to add a little bit of texture and a little bit of visual interest on the column itself. And once again, like I said, I don't want the column to be a big point of focus, but I do want it to still look good. So I decided to just add a couple of highlights here and there. For the skull that's on the base, I decided to do Rakarth flesh, and that pretty much, I left those recesses that dark gray color. Now for this, I left that Rakarth flesh on the palette, and I took some Mournfang brown and put it next to the Rakarth flesh. Now the Mournfang brown that I'm using, I hadn't mixed it yet, so this is just straight up Mournfang brown. And then once I was done putting down all of that Mournfang, I went back and I actually took some of that Rakarth flesh and I started mixing it into the Mournfang. And what I was doing with that is all of these all the areas that are broken on this pot, and I kind of want it to look like I wanted it to be sort of a terracotta pot. So on all of the decorations, all of the raised areas, and all of the damage, I took that Rakarth flesh, mixed it into the Mournfang, and I put it in all of those areas. And then I mixed a little bit more of the Rakarth flesh in. And then on the very end, I used just pure Rakarth flesh to make those raised parts and the damaged areas stand out all the more. And I think that ended up pretty good. Now here, what I'm doing, and this is something you always want to do when you're going to lay down a dark texture paste or a texture paint of any sort, I actually am using Reaper's Ebony Skin. And this, once again, I said it a couple of times, this color is actually becoming my go-to for darker skin tones and for browns, for dirt, for anything that needs to be a really dark color. Because in the end, it actually when it dries, it's a very, very dark brown, and I like the look of it. It's very visually pleasing. Now, I did not let the ebony flesh dry all the way on this, because I decided I kind of wanted a little bit of that ebony flesh, the ebony skin tone, to mix in with this texture paint. So you will see a couple of brown swirls in here, and that's actually by design, because I wanted to see what it would look like. And honestly, it really didn't add much to the scheme, so I probably could have skipped that step and just let it dry all the way. So this particular texture paint is a Grillin Earth by Citadel, and this is the one that is like a crackle paint, so it actually breaks up and looks like very dry, arid earth. And It isn't the texture paste or texture paint that I was originally going to use, but I decided on it anyway. Now, once that was dry, and you need to let that dry for a couple of hours, I threw down a brown wash, and I used the age-old Agrax Earthshade to go over that, and to go over the skull and all of the darker, like, earth areas. And I also threw a little bit of that Agrax over top of the pillar again, over top of the column. And that's to kind of darken down some of those highlights I had put on the column. Now, following up, I decided to kind of to try and smooth out all of the underbelly plates here, the scales on the underbelly, because the scale 75 paint did not go down very cleanly. It was a little bit grainy. So what I'm using here is just a rose pink, and that is a Reaper color, and I mixed in a little bit of Styx purple, and that comes out to about the same hue that I was using when I mixed the other two colors. It's really close visually, unless you're inspecting it really, really close. You can't even tell that there's two different colors, and even if you do look really close, it just looks kind of like two colors blended in. And it actually kind of, to be honest, it looks pretty good in the end. I think it turned out really well. And I repeated this for all of the underbelly scales. This is, I kind of wanted all of the underbelly scales to be a little brighter, to be a little more, to kind of pop off of the model just a little bit. Because even though that the scales should not be your central focus, it should be the head of the model, you still want those individual underbelly scales to look good. You want them to stand out. And in the end, I did not use that bright of a color that it would be, kind of obtrusive and take your vision away from the main focus. Now, once again, if you will ignore the out of focus there, I took some more of that phantom glow and I mixed just a little bit of white into it to push the highlight on the hair and on the jade again. And this was just to make everything, once again, just a little bit brighter, just a little bit more, I don't know, just to make it pop a little better. And then the final piece here, I like my base rims to be black, but you can paint your base rims to be any color you want. And I did do a couple of coats of this just to make sure that it turned out, to be really smooth. I used thin coats and to make it really uniform. So that's it. That's the end. And this is what she looks like once everything is dry. I'm very happy with this color scheme. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. I like the way it looks. And I can't wait to paint up the rest of these ladies for my Warband and or Age of Sigmar army. So, the individual colors that I've used here all kind of flow together very well, in my opinion. And there's a couple of things that pop, and you do want a couple of contrasting colors in there to make everything pop out. Anyway, please like and subscribe, and share the channel if you can. I really appreciate it.